All right. So today we're going to be talking about the present active indicative verb form. Last time we talked just kind of an overview of verbs and how they function. Today will be a little bit more specific to the present active indicative verb. Kind of by way of review, we said that the indicative mood, I'll just write IND for all of you, indicative mood is the mood of reality. What that means is that in the indicative mood, we're going to be asking questions and making statements. I'll give you a quick example here. We can ask yes, no questions. We can ask questions where you weren't going to come home early, were you? With the question that we ask a question with the expected answer of yes, or we can ask a question with the expected answer of no, or we can just ask a question. So the indicative mood really allows us to do that, both in English and in Greek. But it also is the mood, the most common mood. It's the mood of reality. So in our fun little sentence, the fox jumps over the dog. We are making a basic, simple statement. And we're using the indicative mood to tell that. Because we're saying the fox jumps over the dog. The verb here is, we could say, present active indicative. And again, like what we saw, the main verb has to agree with the main subject, right? So the verb jumps is in the present tense. And the fox jumps over the dog currently. Normally we've had it where it's been past tense, the fox jumped over the dog. We're still making a statement. We've changed our tense. But fox agrees in number and in person of jumps. Jumps here is third person singular. If we had the foxes jumps over the dog, it would be a little awkward. We might want to just say the foxes jump over the dog, or the foxes are jumping over the dog, or the fox is jumping over the dog. So we can kind of change things around kind of to change the state of this reality here. Even in another sentence, Tony plays the piano. And we can change our tense. We can make it future, that Tony will play the piano. Tony played the piano in the past tense. And so we can make statements based on what Tony's doing with the piano. And so plays, this sentence here, is in the indicative mood. Or in a question, we could say, how well can Tony play the piano? Again, we're now asking a question in the indicative mood. How well can Tony play the piano? I'm sorry, that's the article here. So we're asking a question, but it's in the indicative mood. We're expecting kind of well, Tony played the piano pretty well, or Tony can play the piano not so well. He needs to practice more. But we see that we can even ask questions in the indicative mood. The indicative mood in both the English and in Greek are very versatile, and they're the most common mood that you'll find. Unfortunately, we're not going to be talking about the subjunctive mood or the optative mood or the infinitive or the participle mood. That is typically second semester Greek that you'll be doing that. But as we've already seen with nouns, so in our case of logos and graphe, the stem is the part of the word that carries the meaning, or the basic meaning. So in the case of logos, logo is the stem. In the case of graphe, graphe is actually the full stem. But we also see sark as being the stem for sarks. And so the stem of the word is what carries the basic meaning. The case ending carries the basic meaning but also determines function. So in the case of sarkos, we have a genitive singular feminine word from sarx. So the stem of the word with the case ending in nouns determines the function of the word, but the stem is what carries the meaning. So the nice thing about this is that verbs are going to function the same way. There's just a little bit more going on than what we've seen with nouns. So nouns have case endings, and verbs are going to have personal endings. So case endings will determine case, which are nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, or vocative, and the singular or plural. The verbs are going to have the stem. So in the case of the paradigm where we're going to get very comfortable with, it's going to be lu, lambda upsilon. Lu is the stem. And it carries the basic meaning of the word, which means to destroy or to lose. I'll just do to destroy here. So we have lu, and then we're going to have a connecting vowel. A connecting vowel is going to connect the stem of the word to the personal ending. So I'm going to go ahead and do the first plural. I'll tell you here in a little bit. So the connecting vowel is omicron. I'll just write CV for you, connecting vowel. So we have lu plus omicron, connecting vowel, plus the personal ending. So in the first person plural, it's going to be min. So this is going to be personal ending. And this is pretty common for verbs, where you have the stem meets this connecting vowel meets the personal ending. And we would translate this, we loose, or we destroy. So the personal ending here tells us how we're going to be translating this. The stem is going to be carrying the meaning, and the connecting vowel is the missing link between the case ending and the stem. And so let me go ahead and write this paradigm out for you. The reason why I did lu omen rather than the present active indicative first person singular form of the word is simply because of the fact that it's a little complicated. So we have the stem, lu, and we actually have the personal ending, which is going to be omega. But this is not actually the personal ending in the first person singular. I'll tell you a little bit what's going on. There's a little bit more morphology in the verbs than there is in the nouns. So you'll see the stem of the word change more frequently based on what's happening in the verb. So luo, lues, lue, luomen, luete, and then luusen. So, in the case of luo, we have the connecting vowel omicron. So we do have a connecting vowel here. But a lot of times what you're going to find is that the omicron lengthens here when it just happens to do that when it meets the stem of lu. So the personal ending here we can just leave blank because there really is none. But there is a connecting vowel, so we'll leave that blank. But it morphs into omega. Little confusing. I would recommend just learning it as luo for now. But do know that there is technically no personal ending here. The connecting vowel lengthens. In the second plural, so actually let's go first, second, third, first, second, third, plural, and singular. So in the second singular, it also is a little confusing what's happening. The true personal ending is sigma. Truly, the connecting vowel here is epsilon, there's a lot of fun stuff happening here. This personal ending here is changing. So right now, just learn it as lues, but do know that the sigma is part of the personal ending. Lue, again, something fun is happening here. We have the connecting vowel epsilon. We also have the personal ending iota. Again, a little weird things are happening here. I don't want to stress it too much, but do know that the personal ending is actually iota. In the plural paradigm, things are a little bit easier. We have the connecting vowel as omicron, as you can see right here, luomen, and then we have the personal ending of men. And so this tells you first person plural. Here we have the connecting vowel epsilon, and then we have the personal ending te. So this is nice here, keeps things pretty consistent. Luusen, sorry, this is a movable nu. Luusen, a little complicated. Technically, the connecting vowel is omicron, and the personal ending is actually NC, nu sigma iota. Again, there's morphology happening here where the nu comes to the end, and then this also lengthens. But this is not the connecting vowel oo. It's just some fun stuff happening here. I would just recommend learning more, really, this chart here, kind of what's going on versus the paradigm. Because if you understand what's happening here, this will make more sense, and you can kind of parse things as you go along. But I also want to show you one more chart that I would recommend learning. And this chart really will help you unpack all of the verbs that we'll be learning in the next few chapters. Kind of the focus with this one is that you have primary and secondary endings, and you can really you'll be able to plug any paradigm into this later, or any verb into this later, and it'll actually make pretty good sense. So this is actually the primary tense, and we'll just go line there, and secondary. Primary, secondary, we're going to go active here, and then we'll draw another little line here. We're only going to fill out 1/4 of this chart today. Over the course of the next few weeks, we're actually going to fill this in, and it'll make a little bit more sense. And then down here, we're going to write middle passive voice. So we have primary, secondary endings, active, middle passive endings. And so let's just go ahead and write these out. So we're going to have luo, and the case ending is going to be, or the personal ending, sorry, the personal ending is there is none. And then we're going to have lues, personal ending is going to be sigma. Then we're going to have lue, personal ending is going to be iota. Luomen, personal ending is going to be men. Luete is going to be te as the personal ending, and then luusen is going to be nu sigma iota. So when you're learning the primary, active, indicative, primary, secondary, tense ending, personal endings, I want you to learn this information here. This chart will kind of help you unplug the paradigms as you go along. But for the present active indicative tense is probably going to be one of the easier ones, just because everything's going to fall under the same category. There's going to be some change, but you're going to find that everything is basically going to be the same in that category. And as the weeks progress, we're actually going to fill this chart out. All right. And what we talked about last week, and I touched on a little bit as well today, is that the verb has to agree in number and in person of the subject. Sometimes what you'll find, kind of an advantage with these personal endings, is that this verb can carry the subject. So agapo mu guneka. Agapo is present active indicative, first person singular from agapao. Mu, as we've learned, is my. Guneka is accusative singular feminine from gunai, gune, meaning wife. And so this is I love my wife. So in this case, agapo is carrying the subject of the sentence. Sometimes you'll find that the verb doesn't carry the sentence. That's perfectly fine. That's kind of what we've gotten used to with nouns, is you have a clear noun which carries the subject. If there is a noun, so if we saw Jesus, we saw Jesus, agapomen, ta tekna, which basically we can't have this. Why? Because agapomen, as we see with the personal ending here, is first person plural. Jesus is not plural. Jesus is singular. It's nominative, singular, masculine. Agapomen is present active indicative, first person plural. So these two do not agree in number and in person. So this verb does not go with this noun. It would have to be Jesus agape. Let me change that for you. Agape ta tekna. Jesus loves the children. So the verb has to agree in number and in person with the noun it's modifying. And the verb with the personal endings will also help you identify the subject of the sentence, because it's going to tell you in person or in person form what the subject is, because it has to agree with it. So one thing that we do want to talk about, because of the fact that the indicative is the mood of reality, we can also say that the indicative focuses the most on time, right? Because time is very important to the indicative mood. Jesus loves the children, both in English and in Greek, is an indicative statement. So it's telling us that right now Jesus loves the children. If I were to say Jesus loved the children, the implication might be that Jesus at some point may have stopped loving the children, right? Or if Jesus will love the children, the implication might be that Jesus does not already yet love the children, but might in the future. So we have time being just a huge aspect to the indicative mood, as it also just kind of further brings out this idea that the indicative mood is the mood of reality. All of the other moods, again, we're not going to talk about them too extensively. Focus more on the state of the subject or have the state of the subject versus the time, its importance in time right now. So I also want to talk about the principal parts. Principal parts are kind of the key to unlocking the verbs. They're very important. They play a huge role for understanding verbs. There's 6 of them. We're actually not going to be learning them in order by Mounce's textbook. Mounce gives us, in order, he gives us 1, 2, and 3. Then he gives us 5 and 6. And then he teaches us, he gives us 6, and then he gives us 4 and 5. But they are, so the first principal part, and you can kind of say that the principal parts kind of hang the overall how the word is going to decline. So if you know that the principal parts are how they function, you can kind of plug different pieces in. So today, the present active indicative is the first principal part. So the first principal part, we're going to write present active. I believe every single verb falls under the first principal part in the New Testament. Not all verbs will fall under one of these 6 categories. Most will, some won't. The second principal part, which we will learn later, is the future active. So the second principal part is future active. I will do this. I do this is the present active. Mounce wants you to kind of translate the present active as a continuous state. I think you'd be better if you just did it as a simple, complete, like I study versus I am studying. It might just be easier to remember one verb rather than supplying the to be verb. The third principal part is the aorist active. We'll learn these categories later. But I just want to give you the principal parts. We'll kind of be talking about these later. As you notice in the vocab, Mounce will give you about 7 listings for a word, or he'll give you dashes. We'll talk about that here shortly. The fourth principal part is the perfect active. The fifth principal part is the perfect middle passive. Again, we'll learn what the middle passive voice is later and why that is important. And then the sixth principal part is the aorist passive. And so these principal parts are really going to be the categories for every single verb we're learning. So we can put them in these categories. But they're also crucial to understanding kind of how things are going to be working. We'll be breaking these apart later and figuring out how they work and why they're important. But this is just kind of 50,000-foot view what we're learning. So just kind of quickly, present active verbs you'll translate as the completed aspect, like I study Greek versus I am studying Greek. You can certainly bring that continuous form in, but not all of the New Testament is going to have that continuous form of it. The nice thing about the continuous form versus the completed form is that there really isn't a difference in the way they look. It would just be more translating. It just is not terribly accurate that the New Testament Greek is using the continuous form consistently. And so agapo, or agapao, I can give you the 6 principal parts here. Agapo is I love. Agapeso is I will love. Agapesa is I loved. And we'll explain later why why this has changed, why there's a little bit of difference of changing here. We'll talk about that later, so we don't need to worry about that now, but we do need to know overall that the principal parts are important. Agape ka, I have loved. And then we have agape mai, I have been loved. And then we have the agape thane, which is thane, which is I was loved. And so you can see just what the principal parts, just how the word changes. I chose agapo because of you can see that the stem is clear in every single principal part. That's not going to be the case for all words, but you can at least see the stem is intact in all 6 principal parts. And I have not included the imperfect, which is not technically a principal part. It does occur. That would be your past tense continuous, where if I were to put in agapo, plug it in, which it does have an imperfect, would be I was loving, kind of this continual aspect. One last thing I want to talk about, and that's going to be the master verb chart. And basically, this chart is going to be filled out. We're going to add to it every single session. It's going to be a pretty large chart. Again, it's going to help us unlock the verbs, why they're important, how they function. But this chart allows us to take a quick view of the verbs and how the function with which changes occur. We'll learn a new piece, like I said, at the end of every lesson. But let me go ahead and give that to you now. So we're going to start with tense. Then we're going to write og in English, which is basically short for augment, and read or redupe, which is short for reduplication. Then we have the tense stem. And then we also have the tense form. And then we're going to have a connecting vowel. I'll just write CV for short. And then we'll have the personal ending. There's a little bit more to it. And I'll write that probably in somewhere else. So the tense for the present active indicative is going to be present. Present is the tense of this form here. Augment reduplication. It's basically you're going to find an epsilon or a, in the case of luo, you would find a le, lu. So the reduplication here is a reduplication of the first word with an epsilon. It's being reduplicated. It's being duplicated. The epsilon here is going to be at the beginning of a word. So elusa, which is the luo, as we can see the stem here. And so the augment or the reduplication is strictly for past tense only. We'll talk about that more when we get there, but because there is no reduplication in the present tense, we're going to leave that blank. The tense stem is going to be present, or we'll just write pres for short. And so again, in the case of luo, there is nothing that happens to the stem. It's present. When we get into the aorist, this will start to make a little bit more sense, and it will start to make less sense at the same time. So tense stem is present. Tense form, we're going to leave blank. Again, we're going to learn what what's going to be added to the stem to change the tense or the tense form. So in the future, we would see luso. Sigma here is the added tense form, and so it changes it from a present stem to a future stem. But there's really nothing we need to be concerned in the present, so we're going to leave that blank. As we saw when I wrote out the paradigm, there are two connecting vowels in this in the present. It's omicron and epsilon, and so we saw the different connecting vowels as they function. This is going to be pretty standard, omicron or epsilon. If there's any connecting vowels, it's typically going to be one of these two. And then we also see the personal endings as being primary, because the present active indicative is taking the primary case endings. So then we can also say that the first singular paradigm, which we don't really need to worry about too much, is luo. So luo is going to be the common common paradigm that we find for the present active indicative. In fact, luo is so nice, you're going to see it in almost every single paradigm. So this is pretty much the master verb chart, and at the end of every lesson, we're going to add to it. We're going to add what we've learned, and we're going to add on top of that.